All right. Well, Scott, we can start whenever you feel ready.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks everybody for joining us. I'm happy to, and working with Eric, to get Dan and Scott, to give a little bit of their time, just to share some thoughts and information about 403B and 457 plans. Dan and Scott are the founders of 403B Wise, which is an absolutely tremendous website that their purpose is to advocate on behalf of teachers and making sure that they have high quality plans that they can contribute to in addition to their defined benefit plan. And they don't work for a financial company, which I think is amazing. They're not here to sell anybody anything, just here to educate and help us make the most informed decisions possible. So I'll turn it over to them, Dan Otter and Scott Downhauer.
Thanks, Scott. And I just, again, a tip of the cap to you, Scott. You are exactly the kind of administrator we wish every school district had because you advocate for your colleagues. You could easily keep all this information to yourself and benefit from it, but no, not only do you help your colleagues, Scott, you also get them access to better low-cost choices. So, Scott, thank you for all you're doing. Wish I had an administrator like you when I was teaching. All right, folks, welcome everyone. This is our favorite thing to do to speak to educators. And as I mentioned earlier, I know how valuable time is, so we're going to get started and try to make the most of this hour. We leave lots of time for questions. Feel free to post them in the chat. We will come back to them, but please know we will address your questions. All right, I have a question for you. Are you making the $360,000 mistake? Typically, many people in these attending these presentations are making that mistake. But what I would tell you is if you realize you are one of those people, please do not panic. Please do not get mad at yourself. Please know at the end, we will show you how you can address this. And the good news is, unlike a lot of school districts we speak with, you have good low cost choices. And again, that's thanks to your administrator here, Scott. All right, real quick, here's going to be our agenda. Very little about us. We're going to look at two what we think are powerful supplemental retirement plans, the 403B and the 457B, that are available to teachers. We're going to talk about the fee impact, the cost of investment products. We're going to look at your vendors, your choices. What are the good vendors? What are the not so good vendors? We're going to talk about how to get out of a bad vendor because typically when we do these, we get a lot of questions about that. We're then going to share resources so you can continue to educate yourself or to come back and sort of look over what we talked about today. And then our favorite part, questions. All right, let's get started. That is me by the red arrow way back in 2000 when I was a teacher, when I had dark hair. It was at McKinley Elementary School in Southern California where I first heard about the 403B. I was a new teacher, probably on the job for 3 months. The kids had left for the day. I was in my classroom, half panicking, trying to get ready for the next day's instruction, as new teachers do, when there was a knock at the door and a woman poked her head in and asked a question that I still remember. She said, "Do you care about your financial future?" Well, I think there's only one answer, and that is, of course, I think about my financial future. She took that as an opportunity to come into the classroom and she started talking about these investments and these investment products and how she helped other teachers at the school. Frankly, folks, I had no idea what she was talking about. I had some vague notion about a pension that if I worked 25, 30 years, I'd get some percentage of my salary in retirement. That's all I knew. I politely listened. When she left on her way out, I said, I'll get back in touch if I'm interested. Lucky for me, I never got back in touch. She was trying to sell me high cost investment products. So I began to self educate myself. And what I learned angered me. It wasn't just my school, it wasn't just my district, it just wasn't California. This was a nationwide problem. Teachers around the country were being sold extremely high cost products. So I wanted to do something about it. So in 2000, I launched the website 403B Wise. And at the time, we were a .com. Today, we are a .org. The whole goal of the website It's the same as today, actually, education and advocacy. We want to be a place where teachers and school employees can come learn about the 403B, the 457B in a non-sales environment. We also wanted to be a place that helped educators advocate for access to better investing choices. I've met some amazing people in the lifetime of this website, like your principal here, but in the 2000s, early 2000s, I met someone I consider one of my best friends, and he's a co-presenter today. It's the other Scott on the call, Scott Downhauer.
Thanks, Dan. Back at you. Uh, Echoing what Dan said, thanks for joining us. I know after a long day, it's not always the most fun to jump on a Zoom. Hopefully, we'll make this entertaining, interesting, and educational. As Dan said, my name is Scott Downhauer. I'm a certified financial planner. I also have a master's degree in financial planning. And I run a firm that has worked with teachers for over 20 years. That said, I am not taking on new clients, and I do not take on clients related to the nonprofit work that we do, because this is about you and about education, not sales. So, as Scott Liska said earlier, there's nothing. We have nothing here to sell you. Like Dan, I got into this. I don't know if I want to say business, but into this interesting niche of a market of the 403B world because my wife is a teacher. She is a middle school science teacher, has been for, I think this is her 24th or 25th year of teaching. And her first or second year of teaching, somebody walked into her classroom, just like they did Dan, just walked right in and said they were sent by the state teachers retirement system and by the school district. Well, long story short, that wasn't true. He was there to sell annuities, high cost, really poor annuities. That piqued my interest. I thought this is really weird. And I jumped on the internet to do some research, and I found this website run by a teacher who lived up the freeway from me, and that teacher's name is Dan Otter. And that's how we ended up getting connected through the internet. So that was 20 some years ago. Anyways, I'm happy to be here with you today and looking forward to answer your questions. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks, Scott. So Scott Downhauer and I, we joined forces. We co-wrote a book called The 403B Wise Guide. We started doing presentations to teachers in person all around the country. That was super enjoyable. And then we launched something called the Teach and Retire Rich podcast. As of today, we have over 300 episodes on a variety of topics. So if there's something personal finance related, we think we probably have covered it or we will cover it. In 2015, Scott and I worked with a couple New York Times reporters on a series of articles on the K-12 403B. Those articles came out in 2016, and to our just amazement, surprise, and luck, a gentleman named Tim Ranzetta read those articles, and he was horrified to hear how educators were being treated. Tim has his own nonprofit, and that goal of that nonprofit is by 2030, every kid graduating from an American high school would have to take a standalone personal finance class. So we jumped on a Zoom call with Tim, and there's a picture of Tim right there. And that's the website he runs, ngpf.org. If you're not familiar with it, I know you're teaching K-8, but if you ever want to teach any personal finance concepts to your students, they have middle school activities, and I think a lot of their material can be adapted for elementary school. Tim reached out to us and said, I'm horrified. Can I do anything to help? And so, thanks to Tim, I was able to leave my job at the University of Redlands. I had moved on from, I taught public school for about 12 years, and then I became a college professor and then administrator. But thanks to Tim's support, I was able to leave my job at the university and then run 403B Wise as a nonprofit full time. Just a quick note here on personal finance instruction. This is from Tim's website. The states in the blue are guaranteeing a class in personal finance. It's my understanding that there is a bill, HB 1375, under consideration in your state. So I think there's a good chance that you will also be a state that requires personal finance. So it was in 2019 that we began this nonprofit endeavor. And as Scott said, we sell no services or products. I do have a book called Teach and Retire Rich. But that is it. And that is sort of separate from the nonprofit. Okay, quick disclaimer. Nothing presented or discussed is to be construed as investment or tax advice. This can be secured from a vetted fiduciary advisor. Someone like Scott, but unfortunately you can't use Scott, but we will share a resource where you can find someone like Scott. This resource will also include the questions that you should use to interview any certified financial planner you might consider using. And that term, certified financial planner, that is the designation at a minimum your planner should have, the CFP. All right, let's do a little math problem. Two Evergreen Park educators, both age 22, both contribute $5,000 a year to a 403b. Both earn 7% average annual return. Both contribute until 60. One educator accumulates more than $500,000 in their 403b. That's pretty good. However, the colleague accumulates more than $300,000 more, $873,147. I want you to consider this question, and we'll come back to it. Why the difference? Just about all the assumptions are the same, but one of your colleagues has $300,000 more dollars in his or her retirement account. All right, let's look at the 403b, 457b quickly using one of my favorite teaching tools, the Venn diagram. So something that is the same about these plans, they're both supplemental to your pension. They're both 401k-like savings plans. This year, if you're under age 50, you can contribute $23,000 to each of these plans. You're over age 50 like me, you can do an additional $7,500. You can contribute on a pre-tax basis, meaning you contribute $5,000 to your 403b, and let's just say you make $60,000, you're going to be taxed on $55,000 instead of $60,000. You'll still have that $5,000, but it's been sheltered from taxes. It's in your 403b, and it's working to grow. You can also now contribute on something called a Roth basis. You will not get an upfront tax break, but in retirement, when you access that money, you won't pay taxes. And we think the younger you are, the more you should consider contributing on a Roth basis. You can invest in mutual funds in both a 403b and a 457b. If you are working at age 59 and a half, you can withdraw money from both of these plans. As I mentioned, you can contribute to both of them, and you can take loans from each of these plans. Now, the 457b has a key advantage over the 403b, especially if you're someone who thinks they will leave education before reaching age 55. Once you separate from service, regardless of your age, you could be 23, you could be 40, you could be 50, 52, 53, 54, you can access 457b money tax penalty free. So you will not be penalized for accessing it. Now, you will owe taxes on that money, but you won't be penalized. With the 403b, you have to wait until age 55 for this benefit. If you take money out before age 55, you will be penalized with the 403b. But again, you have to separate from service to get the 457b tax-free withdrawal. All right, imagine you contribute $23,000 to a 403b, the same amount to a 457b. You're over age 50, so you put $7,500 into the 403b, an equal amount in age 50 catch up into the 457b. For those of you doing mental math, I'll give you a moment here. What is this total? What is it possible that you contribute in 2024 if you have access to both of these plans? I'm working on my teacher wait time. Sure, you've all got the number. It is $61,000. Again, we are not saying that any of you should be able to do this. You are an outlier educator if you're able to do this. But we have met teachers who are later in their careers, maybe their kids' college has been paid for, maybe these lucky people who have their house paid for, or their teaching salary is a second income, or they've gotten an inheritance, and they can live on the inheritance, and they can set up their contributions to equal $61,000. I want you just to know what is possible. Okay, so you have a 403B, you have a 457B. What companies can you invest in? You actually have a decently sized list. Where I live in California, my town has more than 40 financial companies. Most of them are high cost, terrible products. Same story in the school district Scott's wife teaches in. She's about 30 miles away, and it is the same problem. Texas, terribly long list. So at a blanche, at first blush, this is not a bad looking plan simply because of its size. But how good are each of these companies? And did you know each of these companies have dozens and dozens of investment choices? This is where it starts to get a little complex. How good or bad is this plan? That's the question participants want to know. And we decided to help them. So a couple of years ago, we started something called the District Plan Rating Project. Now, there are close to 14,000 school districts in the country. We are trying very hard to list and grade as many K-12 403B vendor lists as we can. And as of today, we've got almost 4,700 school district plans in our database. We have just about all the large school districts. So we think we have data now covering about 1.7 million teachers, which is about 55% of all public K-12 teachers. Now, if you want to search your district or a neighboring district or any district in the country, you would just go to 403bwise.org. You would pick your state, a drop-down menu would appear, and then you would click that. So you can see how your vendor list would be accessible. Now, we have what I think is a super simple, innovative grading system, and this was created by my co-presenter, Scott Downhour.
Co-created, but also helped along through a whole bunch of teachers that we had go through it and make suggestions, because I think we originally started with like a star system, and they're like, no, we need to do something different. So we actually have two different systems, one that rates the vendors themselves, and then one that grades the school district. So let's start with the ratings, because that's how we get to the gradings. So basically, we use a traffic light signal system to determine whether or not a provider is, one that you should pay attention to. Well, you should pay attention to all of them, but whether or not you should actually use them or not. And just like when you come to a traffic light that is red, if you come across a red vendor, we think you should stop. Stop and do what? Well, if you have money with the red vendor, you should maybe reconsider if you should be with that red vendor. Maybe think about moving money from a red vendor. But at a minimum, you need to dig deeper, because the reason there is a reason they are red. One reason they might be red is that they force you to use a salesperson in order to get into that product. Oftentimes there are upfront commissions, or commissions that are charged if you try to get out of the product early. The fees are generally pretty high. They also have a lot of conflicts of interest, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. And then they also might be what we call indexed annuities. These can be very problematic products that sort of trap you in there and do not give you a very good rate of return, even though they have what sounds like a great story. So if you have a red vendor, you need to dig a little deeper and determine whether or not you should be with that red vendor. And we have, as you can see, these little arrows here show the red vendors that are available in your school district. Now, if you come to, so what else? We talked about conflicts of interest with red vendors. So I want to give you an example of a conflict of interest. We dug into the disclosure documents of many of the red vendors, and this is just one of the many problematic things that we found. I'm just going to read one sentence of this to you. And this was in the small print. This is a document that's required to be given to you, and I bet you nobody has actually seen this. So the highlighted portion is financial professionals, FPs, must meet certain minimum sales requirements in proprietary insurance products to qualify for health and retirement benefits. So what does that mean? It basically means if this representative of this company, in this case Equitable, doesn't sell enough of a certain product that Equitable wants them to sell, then their health and retirement benefits are going to be affected in a negative way. The subsidy that they receive, well, maybe the matching contributions or the employer contributions to their retirement plan or their health insurance are going to be reduced. Imagine if your health insurance was dependent on how many A's or B's that you gave. That would be very problematic. Instead of evaluating your students on what they're actually doing in class, you have to take into account whether or not you're going to be able to see a doctor next month. That's problematic. We don't think that conflict should exist. We think that is not fiduciary based. And we think those are not the types of things that should be driving what is being sold to you. That's what gets a vendor red. What else gets a vendor red? Well, paying large amounts of money in settlements to regulatory organizations. This particular vendor in 2022 had to pay a $50 million penalty for misleading account statements, where they had a line item on their account statement that said fees and expenses, and then didn't list the overwhelming majority of fees and expenses that the people or that the participants were paying. Oftentimes it said zero, when in fact they were paying quite a bit in fees and expenses. So that's another thing that can get a vendor red. So when you see a yellow light, you're not supposed to speed through it, even though, I mean, sometimes that actually is the right thing to do, is to speed through it. But generally, it's proceed with caution. So if you have a yellow vendor, we're not saying that you should get rid of it immediately, but you should take a deeper dive and make sure it's the right product for you. So what makes a vendor yellow? Well, the nice thing about a yellow vendor is there's no upfront commissions. There's usually no charges that you have to pay if you try to get out of the product early. So that's nice. But the fees tend to be a little bit higher, whether they be an asset-based fee or just an annual fee. They also might not offer index funds, or if they do, it might just be one or two. And here at 403 Wise, we're big fans of low-cost index funds. That's probably a topic for a whole nother webinar. But if they don't offer index funds, that definitely makes them a yellow vendor. They also may have some questionable practices. Maybe they're being used as bait. They're actually a red vendor using a reasonable product as bait to get you into the red vendor products. Or they are just they're using the 403B as maybe a loss leader to sell you other financial products. So that's the yellow vendors. And here are the yellow. Do they have any yellow vendors, Dan? It looks like no. Okay. So then that brings us to green. When you see a green light, that means go. Green means go. If you've got a green vendor, you don't have to spend a lot of extra time fretting about whether you should have your money there. If you have a green vendor, you're in a good spot. A green vendor has very low fees. They don't have nearly the amount of conflicts of interest that the other vendors have. Their asset-based fees are generally under 0.4%. And in fact, there are two vendors that are green plus. They don't have any asset-based fees, asset-based administrative fees. The expenses of these funds always have a small asset-based fee. And you can build a portfolio for under 0.2%. That's 0.2%. And most of these, you can build a portfolio for even less than that, sometimes less than 50% of that amount. Fidelity, for example, costs $24 a year. And while their target date funds only charge 0.08%, you can actually buy an index fund that charges 0.015%, which is like as close to free as you're ever going to get. And with investments, the lower your expenses, over time, the higher your returns are going to be. There is a direct studies show that there is a direct correlation. So green means go. And you do have two very good vendors, both Fidelity and Vanguard, and we are fans of both of those. Fidelity, we suggest that you stick to the index funds and the Fidelity Freedom Index target date funds. And Vanguard, they're pretty much low cost across the board. So congratulations, you have two very good vendors. So how do we grade school districts? Well, we grade school districts using our rating system, our traffic light rating system. If you have only red vendors available, and you're going to find out here pretty soon, there are a lot of school districts that only have red vendors, you're going to get an F. And of course, you should get an F. We don't think you should even be contributing. There are very rare circumstances where you should be contributing to a 403B if all of the vendors are red. If you have just one yellow vendor, you can get upgraded to a D. And as long as you have at least one green vendor, your plan can get a C. And this is like the one time where you can be happy with a C. Because having these green vendors, I mean, like I said, that Fidelity vendor, that's probably one of the lowest cost defined contribution plans in the country. It's actually cheaper than some of the largest corporations in the country. $24 and 0.015%. It's a very good deal. Vanguard charges $60 and as low as 0.02%, I believe. So this is the one time you can be very happy that you have a C. The reason it still gets a C, though, is because even though it has a couple great vendors, the vast majority of people are usually not in those vendors. So how can you get a B or an A? Well, the school district actually has to do some work. And they need to take their plan out to bid and force vendors to compete. And by doing that, they'll basically do one of two things. They'll narrow the list down to up to three vendors that have committed to low costs and providing education with as few conflicts as possible. Or they will go to a single vendor. And we prefer single vendor plans, but that's a little bit out of what we're talking about today. But we prefer one single vendor, so you get one unified message. All of those assets can be used to drive the price down so that you always have a really competitive option. So anyways, for a school district to become a B or an A, they have to put their plan out to bid. We've graded nearly 5,000 school districts so far. Of them, less than 4% have an A or a B. So that might tell you a little bit of something about this industry. When we first started doing these gradings, this number was lower. I mean, I'm not sure when it was probably around 50%, but this has consistently been going up. We're proud to say that more and more school districts are adding the green vendors. And so we're at 62%, and that's where you guys are at. And then finally, and sadly, 34%, 1 in 3 school districts have a D or an F. That's wild to me. So what is your school district? Your school district, I think I already gave it away, is a C. And as Dan says, C's get degrees. And you should not be unhappy about getting a C in this particular instance. So also, it used to be a D-rated plan, but another Scott on this call was very, very persistent. There we go. Persistent in getting some really good vendors added. In fact, Vanguard and Fidelity have been added, and they are fantastic. And also, Fidelity is available as a 457 now, and you should be very happy about that. Okay, back to our original question. 2 Evergreen Park educators. One accumulates a little over $500,000. The other one accumulates just under $900,000. About say $875,000. That's a big difference. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd love to have the $500,000. It's better than nothing. Who wouldn't? But boy, these educators took the same amount of risk. They invested in the same thing. They invested over the exact same time period. They invested the same amount of money. Why is there such a big difference? In the chat, my gosh, I forgot the word chat, Dan. Oh my gosh, this is my day. In the chat, who can tell me what the difference is between these two educators? And I don't know if anybody chimed in earlier, but we'll give it just a moment here. What is the difference between these two educators? Why does one have almost $360,000 more? Matthew. Anybody else? Give it just another moment here, but I think you guys are on to us. Actually, Amanda, that is a very good answer, and that is very true. So we have fees and different vendors. Yes, so different vendors have different fees, as we have. Matt stole my answer. As you saw earlier, we got red vendors and yellow vendors and green vendors. Oh my, the lower the cost, the greener the vendor, and those fees make a tremendous difference. As I said, all assumptions are basically the same. Yes, they are using different vendors. One vendor is charging 2.3%. This teacher's invested in the Equitable AXA Target 2065 allocation fund. We'll talk about target date funds in just a moment. Now, 2.3% doesn't sound like that much. I think all of us would have been pretty happy if the last couple years inflation was only 2.3%. In fact, we probably would have been ecstatic compared to what we got. But 2.3% is actually quite a bit, especially when you compare it to teacher number 2, who is in the Vanguard Target Retirement 2065 fund, a low-cost index fund that charges 0.08. The first one is nearly 29 times more expensive. 29 times. You're not getting something that's 29 times better. It's the same investments. Now, one has different mutual funds than the other, but at the end of the day, they're allocated to stocks in a very similar way. 2.3% doesn't sound like much, but when that is compounded over long periods of time, that's how we end up with such massive disparities. Both of these educators invested in what's called a target date fund. A target date fund is just simply a fund that is managed on your behalf based on when you expect to retire. So in this case, this target date fund would be the 2065, and this target date fund is going to be managed more aggressively at the beginning. So if it was 2024, it's going to be, see that all that orange is stocks. So it's going to be very aggressive at the beginning. There is a manager who is making changes within this portfolio. It is getting more conservative over time. As you can see, the orange gets smaller and smaller by the time 2065 rolls around, it is majority blue, which is the less risky portion of the assets. So you go from very risky at the beginning to less risky to even less risky at retirement. It's all managed for you. You don't have to do anything. That's kind of the nice thing about a target date fund. And that served as the basis for our comparison. And that is where we get the almost $360,000 mistake. It's in fees. So again, just to recap, the green vendors are Fidelity and Vanguard, and the vendor that we compared it to in this example was an actively managed target date option from Equitable. You also have a 457, which we really like a 457. We think it's a fantastic plan if it has a good option available to you. And recently, Fidelity Investments was added as a 457 plan to your program, and we're super happy about that. Because again, I believe that's also just $24 a year, and you have access to fantastic investment options. So you should be very happy. We don't yet rate 457 plans, but this would be very similar. Is this me, Dan? The right kind of advisor? Okay. So the right kind of advisor.
Scott, you are the right kind of advisor. That is you.
That's why I was wondering if I should. Okay. So so we think that your advisor should be, if you're going to work with somebody, and we are often painted as people who are anti-advice. We are not anti-advice. We are anti-heavily conflicted advice. We think anybody who's going to be advising you on your money should be subject to the highest standards out there. And that high standard is the fiduciary standard, someone who is required to put your interest ahead of their own. And so we have created a couple resources on the 403B Wise website. Dan is showing it to you right now. One is the Fiduciary Pledge. This is something that you can quite literally download and send as a PDF to someone you're prospectively working with. And there should be no hesitation in signing this. If there is, that is a red flag. This is as simply worded as possible. This just requires them to act in your best interest and put your interest ahead of their own at all times. These people will say that they will work in your best interest. They'll say it, but it needs to be in writing, and they need to say it will be at all times. It's very important. Also, if you're interviewing a financial planner or an advisor, we have put together a pretty simple question list. And I have actually gotten this question list when I was taking on clients. It's 20 questions that they can answer. It's available in a PDF, so you can download it and send it off. And they should be able to answer these questions in full in writing. If they want to answer these questions, but just over the phone, that's because they don't really want to give full answers or answers that they could actually get in trouble for. So you want these in writing, I think, is really the best way. Now, where do you find an advisor? This is a little difficult. There are some fee-only fiduciary-based organizations out there. They offer a lot of different ways of paying, from hourly fees to subscription fees to assets under management. And the links for 3 of these organizations are on that webpage. There's XY Planning, there's Garrett Planning that Dan is showing right now, as well as NAPFA. And we hope that more advisors, people who have their certified financial planner designation, will want to work with teachers, because they are just a fantastic group of people to work with. And you deserve to have your best interest always put ahead of that of your financial advisor.
Thanks, Scott. So I'm going to guess, and I hope I'm wrong, but there's probably 1 or 2 of you, or maybe you know someone who has gotten themselves wrapped up in one of the not so great vendors. And I am posting now in the chat 2 resources we have for getting out of a bad vendor. One is how to specifically get out of Equitable. So at a sort of 25,000 foot view, what you want to do is stop making contributions. So let's say you're doing $200 a month into a red rated vendor. What we would say is stop making that contribution, go to your school district, fill out a new salary reduction agreement, and just zero it out. So now your money is not going into a hole. What do they say when you're digging a hole? Stop. Open a new 403B with a new 403B vendor. Scott has, I know he's offered to help colleagues to open these accounts, and he can tell you it's pretty straightforward. So let's say you just decide to go to Fidelity. We'll go alphabetical. Fidelity, you open that account, then you go back to your school district, fill out another salary reduction agreement, and in it you say $200 a month to Fidelity. So now the good news is that monthly contribution, you can rest assured that it's now going to a quality company. Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2 is, what do you do with the money in the bad vendor? And our recommendation would be, do not do a thing until the summer. These companies make it very easy to get in. They make it very hard and frustrating to get out. And we know how demanding your job is during the school year. If you want to take this on during the year, please do it. But please, I just want you to be prepared for some of the hurdles you're going to face. These companies also charge surrender penalties. So not only have they ripped you off with their fees, they're going to want to extract a pound of flesh for you to leave. Now, the good news is that these fees decline over time. So maybe only 25% of it, 50% of it is subject to fees. You got a couple choices there. You could say, forget it. I'm so bad at this company. I don't care what I'm paying, move it all. Or you could move the part that is no longer subject to penalty. That is totally up to you. So you can transfer it all at once or in phases. I'm going to share with you what we think is one of the best resources in addition to the links I just gave you. The 403B Wise Facebook group. Even if you hate Facebook, I think personally and financially, it would be worth you joining just to get assistance on how to get out of your bad 403B. We have got close to 15,000 people, and I can tell you, folks, the overwhelming majority of those people came to our Facebook group because they wanted to get out of a bad vendor. So there are so many people in this group who know exactly what you went through or are going through it themselves. We have a guy named Dan Dews, unbelievable retired teacher from the Seattle area that Scott and I had the pleasure of meeting. He's in his late 70s. He spends probably 2 to 3 hours a day helping people on the 403B Wise Facebook. So log in, join it. You have to answer some questions. We'll approve you. We think that is going to be your best resource unless you hire a financial planner. But they may not have any familiarity with these kind of transactions. You are a state who has got a book made specifically for educators that covers all of your retirement plans. And your principal, Scott Liska, has copies, is my understanding, right, Scott?
Yeah, I would say I have a bunch of them. I got one right here. If you want to borrow one, just shoot me an email. And even if you're at a different school, I'll put it through in our office, and you can have it by the end of the week.
Fantastic. Fantastic. The goal of the author, Carl Fish, is to collaborate with a teacher in every state and put a book out specific for every state in the country. So this is a wonderful resource. Even if you decide to buy it, it's only $9. I think that is money well spent. If you're as mad as Scott and I are about the state of the K-12 403B and you want to get your colleagues involved, we have got a short podcast series called Learn by Being Burned, Teachers in the K-12 403B. In it, teachers tell how they got burned, how they learned, and how they started advocating for change. This is the resources that we have. Please come to 403bwise.org. Go to our Facebook group. Every month, except for February, we do office hours, and our next one is on March 6th. And for 1 hour, we just answer questions. So it's not us presenting anything. We might point out something new or something newsworthy, but it is basically 55 minutes of us, actually Scott, answering questions that you have. So if you go to our homepage, you can see at the top and you can register. It's all free. I'm posting a link to a page we've created with lots of resources. And I'm also going to post a link to this presentation so you can look at it later. And with that, we would welcome taking your questions. Any questions, you can ask them, you can put them in chat. You can think about them and come to our office hours. And here I'll show you where our office hours are. So if you go to our homepage and you look right at the top here where it says events, March 6th, click events. And it's just like how you registered for this event. Just simply click that, go ahead and register. Name. We don't keep any of this information. Sign up. We'll see you on the 6th. We can answer questions.
I would just say
super helpful. Thanks, Scott.
You talked a little bit about the salary reduction agreements. Tracy Nolan in the business office is your go-to person for that. She's absolutely fantastic. And then obviously, or maybe not so obviously, but we don't get those plans added without Eric's help too. So he's the one who, put boots on the ground and made the phone calls and things like that.
Yeah, it's been great working with Scott and you guys. Everything's been great. Scott has all the answers to 403s, and it's been great for the beginning of my career to work and understand more about this and gain knowledge as I go.
Eric, thanks for not only being a teacher, but for your involvement in this. And we're thrilled that at this stage of your career, you have this information and are taking advantage of it. So that is
Definitely.
fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Amanda, no questions, but got out of Equitable and into Vanguard thanks to you guys. Oh my gosh, fantastic, Amanda. And I'm sure you'd be willing to answer questions for your colleagues. Do you mind saying how hard was it to get out of Equitable? What was your strategy and how long did it take?
Hi, yes. So I got out. I joined the Facebook group and that was helpful. And then like Scott said, like talking to Tracy at the district office, she helped me with the paperwork. So getting out was pretty fast and quick, but getting started with Vanguard, it like took like probably
Always
like a
Vanguard was
month.
the problem.
Well, like I think it was more me procrastinating, be like, oh, this is gonna take so much time. And then I finally filled out the paperwork and then I made an account and like talked to someone on the phone at Vanguard and they got me hooked up. And like by time me starting the paperwork with Vanguard, I was like good to go in like 3 days with it all. So it was more so on my end, but I haven't
I just lost
I
your.
haven't yeah, sorry. I haven't transferred my money out of Equitable yet. So I'm like
Oh, yes.
deciding,
But I
like
was
you
just gonna
said.
ask.
That's the thing that
Yeah.
could take some time, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, but I've been contributing to Vanguard since like your guys' last, like probably like 2 months after your last presentation. So it's been, I'm happy with that. So thank you for your help.
You know what's so good about this? And Scott and I are not market timers. We think you have to look in 30-year time horizons. You may open a Vanguard account tomorrow and the market may drop 50%. But I think our last presentation was about 2 years ago, and
Yeah.
2022 was not a good year. So if you were
Mhm.
contributing every month, you were buying discounted share prices. And then last year was a superb year. It was up over 25%. So you probably have seen a nice little bump compared to what you put in. So, but again, you got to think about this in 30-year increments.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Any questions? I have one for Scott Liska. Scott, do you talk to your colleagues about this, your other administrators, and do they care as much as you, or is it what's the story there?
I'll defer to, Ashley's here. We have a couple
Ah,
admin.
I love it. Here's the deal. I mean, Scott, I see a second career for him down the road when he sadly leaves education. He's just so good at this. And I appreciate all of his knowledge. I wish I had a tenth of it. We love listening to it, and we need to be, I think everybody needs to be better about it, and really take those steps. So we appreciate him and use him as a resource whenever we can.
And I'll be like, I have a bunch of money tied up at Equitable. Like, it's not, that's the whole thing. I've been burned by this too. That's part of the reason why I'm passionate about it, is that, they were taking 6% of my money when I first started in Evergreen out of a 5% load fee and then a 1.5%, expense ratio. And it's brutal.
Yeah, for sure.
do not blame yourselves. That's the thing. When time we hear a teacher get mad at themselves, now get mad at yourself if tomorrow you open an account with Equitable after attending this presentation. Then you have no one to blame but yourself. But this is a problem Scott and I are trying to address. I'm the only full-time employee, but we think we're making progress, as Scott pointed out, at least in getting districts to add one vendor. What we're trying to highlight now is the fact that teachers and educators are the only class of unprotected investors. There's this sort of archaic, old federal legislation governing retirement plans called ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, when I think Gerald Ford was the president. It applies to the 401k. It does not apply to the K-12 403b. So if your spouse or a friend or a parent or someone you know has a 401k, it's highly doubtful they've got more than one vendor. It's highly doubtful the sales agents are going around their offices signing people up in the in the lounge. That's the reason, folks. And we're trying to bring more awareness to this because we want Congress to make the K-12 403B subject to ERISA. And this is going to be one hell of a challenge.
Mhm.
All right. Any other questions? If you think of them, do not hesitate to reach out. Hello at 403B Wise. If you have a friend, family member at another school, district, could be a different state, we do these for free, and we would be happy to do one for other educators. The more people who can get this news and information, the better.
How do you find out if you do have an equitable account, like what you're invested in? Like I mean, how do you know? Do you want to know how bad I mean, what's the process for that?
Yeah, I'll let Scott. I guess Scott, would you say is your account statement, and then should we show them 403B compare? Is that something we could? You think, Scott Liska, that would be helpful for them to see what that looks like? I'll let the
I
Scott.
think yes.
Okay.
I mean, that's what makes this so difficult is that there is no required disclosure given to you. If, as Dan was alluding to earlier about ERISA-based plans have this requirement that every single year the fees and expenses are required to be disclosed to you in writing. Like you can download it from the website. That's not the case with non-ERISA 403B. So you kind of have to piece it together. Generally, it's going to be a statement. Equitable, I'm not sure what products are selling there. It seems like it's slightly different. Scott has a slightly different product than we normally see. We usually see this thing called the Equivest 201, just as an example.
I talked to a teacher today with this on their statement. So I definitely know they sell it here. It's been pushed here by.
Got it.
And the thing to point out is, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Scott, but like they charge 1.2% on every single investment. So that doesn't even count what the actual investment product you choose. Think about that. In our example, we use Vanguard, 0.08 total. Everything comes with at least 1.2. And then you go to your investment options, and let's say you even use the cheapest one, which is 0.54. You're now at almost 1.75%. Think about that compared to 0.08. And it gets worse, up to 1.4%. I mean, this is what's going on. So this is a great resource, 403B Compare. You can search most 403B products.
Yeah, and that I mean, that comparison that Dan just showed, the equity index that costs 0.54% for a total of 1.74, that owns the exact same stocks in the exact proportion as does the Fidelity 500 index fund or the Vanguard 500 index fund. That makes that particular investment option, it's the same thing. There are zero differences. 116 times more expensive. You thought 29 times is bad. That's 116 times. You can buy the S&P 500 for 0.015%. As I said earlier at Fidelity, it's 1.74. 1.74 divided by 0.015. That's 116. Like, imagine going to like your car dealership and they had a Honda Accord and a Toyota Camry. Very similar cars. Actually, let's say they had a Honda Accord in blue and then they had a Honda Accord in silver. One was $30,000. The other was, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to actually do math here. $3.5 million.
Scott, the car should be green and red.
Right. There you go, green and red. That was that my mistake. I mean, that's what we're talking about. That's the difference. 116 times for the exact same investment. So like these people need to be providing extraordinary value, not just enrolling you and telling you to increase your contributions every year, although that is important as well. So yeah, fees matter. They might not matter in an individual year. Last year, S&P 500 was up a lot. I think it was like something like 23%. So someone who is in, Fidelity is going to get like 23%. Someone who is in Equitable, 100% in that stock fund, 21 point something percent. And you're not disappointed. Nobody's crying over a 21% return last year. But you can't look at that as a 1-year deal. You have to look at over time, over long periods of time. How is that going to be affected? And 1.74% in fees on an investment that's just likely to average around 9%, you're automatically giving up 20% of the potential return every single year in fees. That's dramatic. And in any single year, it's not a big deal, but over long periods of time, John Bogle called it the tyranny of compounding. And that's exactly what it is. It will over time, decimate your account. You're taking the risk. Somebody
Like
else
termites.
is getting like termites, slowly and then quickly. Anyways, all right, I'll get off my high horse.
Thank you again, everyone. Scott, thank you for making this happen. I'm going to put you on the spot, Scott Liska. You should come on our podcast. What do you think? Talk about all the advocacy you do.
That'd
What do
be
you
great.
think?
Happy to do that. I would say just one more question, because
Sure.
I've been going through this with a couple people. So they're going to open an account with Vanguard or Fidelity, and one of the questions they're going to have to answer is where they're going to direct their contributions, right? So what do we tell those
I'll
people?
go first. Well, I think there's several answers. One is we could probably think of some investment books so you could learn about it, the basics. I think for the beginner, the target date retirement plan makes so much sense because it's one mutual fund aimed at a date in the future. As Scott, my co-presenter said, it's managed by a team who makes it a little less risky every year. To me, that is like to get started. This is what 401k employers generally auto enroll new employees into because it assures they're in a generally correct asset allocation for their age. If they're so Vanguard and Fidelity have fixed mutual funds. So one mutual fund that is fixed, and it could be 50-50, and that never changes. Scott, what are those called? Those aren't lifestyle, or are those lifestyle?
They're called life. Well, I call them lifestyle. Vanguard calls theirs life strategy.
Life
And they have
strategy,
4
yeah.
life strategy funds that range from very conservative, which is just the income fund, to conservative growth, which is 40% stocks, always 40% stocks, to moderate growth, which is always 60% stocks, and life strategy growth, which is always 80% stocks. So if you're looking something you can kind of tailor your allocation to use, maybe like, listen, I just can't handle that much fluctuation.
There you
it
go,
is.
Scott. You can see I'm showing them like the
Yeah,
one.
you
that's
can look
20
at one of
stocks.
those. Yeah.
I'll put that in the chat.
Now, Fidelity does have these, but for whatever reason, they don't have them in an index format, so they're going to be more expensive, which is the only knock I have on Fidelity. Fidelity does have index target date funds, though.
What one school of thought, and again, this is all investing is personal, but if you feel very comfortable with your pension, the pension could be looked at as the fixed portion of your portfolio. That's the one you can count on. That's you're assured. You could be a little more risky. Maybe then you would do 60 stocks, 40 bonds. But again, this is highly personal. So Scott, hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, no, for sure. And as far as the pension goes, that book, that TLDR book, is fantastic.
Yeah.
And certainly willing to talk to anybody about that too.
Yeah, I think he's got those guys have some good investment tips, I think, in that book as well. And then is it JL Collins? I'll Teach You to Be Rich, right, Scott? He talks a lot about index funds and getting started for the beginner, I think.
Simple Path.
Simple Path. I'm sorry. Yeah, here it is. Simple Path. I'm blurred. But anyway, Simple Path to Wealth could be a way to go.
I've got a copy of that one in the library too.
You've got a good library. I'm really liking that. Yeah, there you go. So there's that Simple Path to Wealth. our favorite book is The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. He has a podcast that are like 15 to 20-minute nuggets of gold. That's really good. If you have a teenager, Mind Your Money, I think is really good. She works for Tim at NGPF. And in fact, I actually use this book with my college students. I think it's a really good introduction to investing as well. So if you're new to this, I think this could be a good book as well.
The last thing, Scott put it in the chat earlier, but it's that Bill Bernstein book, the If You Can, it's probably like 5 or 6 pages of a Word document, but that is a great starting point.
Just put it in there again.
Yeah, there's so many good podcasts out there that teach the basics of investing. And I think, I know some people, they don't care. They want it to be simple, and that's no problem. But you might, and Eric, it sounds like maybe this happened to you. You start to get involved, right? And you really want to keep learning more, right? It becomes, I don't know if you want to talk about your journey at all.
I mean, it's just kind of, I remember that scenario from last year that you showed with the 2 differences. And, talking with Scott Liska, it's just kind of like, why don't we offer the cheap, the lower percent rates and all those? I mean, there's no reason not to do it. It only gets more money in our pockets at the end of the day. So it doesn't cost the district anything, but it's just been good learning about this and just knowing for the rest of my career as well, just like how to properly get things set up.
Yeah, no, it's, I tell you what it is, it's empowering. And I didn't really learn this until my late 20s. So again, it's never too late. Even in your 30s, 40s, you can still make changes that can positively impact your life. Well, Scott Downhauer and I could talk about this all night, and but we also want to respect you guys, your time. So we would be happy to do this again. Scott Liska, if you wanted us to do one maybe later in the spring, maybe we could talk a little bit more about stocks and bonds and mutual funds. We could do that too, for people who maybe have had this presentation. Get a little bit more into the actual investing.
For sure. Yeah.
All right, Scott. So Scott Liska, if you'd like to be on our podcast, let us know some dates you're available, and we would love it.
For sure. Sounds awesome.
Bye, you guys. Bye, everyone. Have a great
Bye.
night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank
for being here.
you.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.